Welcome back, fellow Illumineers, to be our guest. In today's video, we're going back to our deck tech series. We're going to be covering everything Stitch Rockstar today. What color to pair with Amber? How dedicated do we want to be to the combo? Do we want to go all in, or do we want to be a little bit cautious with our control cards and draw cards and other elements? We'll find out more in just a little bit. But before we start, I want to address the fact that these videos are long. Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it. I am wordy, okay? It is what it is. The fact of the matter is, there's great content out there, tons of great creators that are featuring short, quick hit videos, easily digestible, to talk you through, here's a deck that exists, here's why you might like it, go play it. And that's great. But at the end of the day, the problem that I have with those videos, I shouldn't say problem, they fill a niche, right? They're great for what they do. The problem I have in terms of the whole picture is that they don't really equip you with the tools to build a deck yourself. All it is giving a man a fish. You know the old expression, teach a man a fish, give a man a fish, right? They're just giving you a deck, say, here, play this. And I don't really think that that helps you in building the deck that you want to build. Yeah, if you want to build a Stitch Rockstar deck, I can tell you in 5 minutes what to put in it, why you might want to play it, that's great. But at the end of the day, if you want to build another deck with other cards that are released, that's not going to help you. So I'm here to try and help you and break down the decision making and the process that goes into building a deck, and just use Stitch Rockstar as an example. So our previous deck tech video, we went into an Amethyst Steel midrange deck, right? And the decision making that went into that. And although that deck that exists is now irrelevant because we've introduced more cards that potentially could make that deck better, the concept of that video is still very relevant and hopefully will be throughout the existence of Lorcana, because ultimately it's going to hopefully equip you to decide, how do I build a mid-range type deck, right? And now I want to educate you on, how do I build a combo type deck? Because that's what Stitch Rockstar is. It's a card that screams combination of cards. So that's what today's series is all about. So bear with me as I dig through this a little bit deeper than most, and hopefully you'll come along with the ride with me and enjoy it yourself. So, if that sounds appealing to you, you know what we say, be our guest. Let's hit it. All right. So the first decision that we have to make is we have this one card that we know we want to build around, Stitch Rockstar, right? But it is one color and we have access to two. So we know we're going to be Amber, but the question then is what color to pair with it? Well, I can tell you that there's two very competing thoughts out there. There's an Amethyst variant and there's a Steel variant. I am a huge lover of Amethyst. I think it is my favorite color, and so naturally I went there first, right? It made sense to me. If Stitch Rockstar is all about drawing cards, why not complement it with more card draw, which Amethyst is really strong with? The realization that I came to is after doing some play testing, which we'll come back to the concept of that a little bit later, but after I did some play testing, I came to the realization that the card draw in Amethyst actually slowed down the Stitch combo for two very specific reasons. Two of the best cards in Amethyst, especially for card draw, are one, Maleficent Sorceress, which is a 3-cost character, which does not combine well with Stitch Rockstar, and two, Friends on the Other Side, which is best when partnered with a 3-cost character, which does not combine well with Stitch Rockstar. So both of these cards, when you drew them with Stitch Rockstar, slowed things down. Because ultimately, what are we trying to accomplish with Stitch Rockstar? If you have Stitch out on the battlefield, and you go play a 1-cost character, and then you draw a Maleficent Sorceress with 2 ink left, well, you've stalled. You're done for the turn, right? There's nothing else you can do. What we want to try and do is play that 1-cost character, draw another 1-cost character, play it, draw another 1-cost character or 2-cost character, play out an ink, play that, right? Get a critical mass of small characters on the battlefield. Because if I'm only playing 1 or 2 characters a turn, right, my opponent, who will probably have bigger characters than me, can easily challenge them, eliminate them, and control the board. What I want to do is make sure that on any given turn, I'm playing more characters than he can possibly challenge and control, so that it just gets out of hand, right? And when I have anything that stops that from happening, every card that is not a 1 or 2 cost character, I have to assess very carefully whether it's worth being in the deck, because otherwise I run the risk of drawing that card when I'm trying to go off, as they say, and stalling. You'll hear me use that term throughout this video, go off. What does that mean? When you hear go off, just think I'm chaining draw into draw into draw. My combination is working really effectively, right? I'm playing a 1 or 2 cost character, drawing another, playing a 1/2 cost character, drawing another, etc., etc., right? And just flooding the board with characters, right? So this is what we're trying to do, and that's what I would categorize as going off with a Stitch Rockstar deck, right? So inevitably, some of the best cards, the cards that for me are auto-includes in Amethyst decks, actually conflict with what I'm trying to do with Stitch Rockstar. The other issue that I had with the Amethyst deck is, although we have a couple of one-time card draws in Maleficent Sorceress and Friends on the Other Side, after that, we ran out of gas, right? And when you're only drawing 1 or 2 cost characters for the most part, you kind of need a lot of card draw. You need a lot. Remember that critical mass, right? Just drawing 1 or 2 extra 1 or 2 cost characters is not really a big game, right? So inevitably, unless I drew Stitch Rockstar and he stayed on the board, everything else fell apart. So I needed consistent card draw. I needed repeated card draw, not just the 1 or 2 cards from Maleficent or Friends on the Other Side. I needed a lot of card draw. And so I looked at Steel, and the reason why I thought Steel was so appealing was because of Beast's Mirror. And although it is not as powerful as Stitch Rockstar by any stretch of the imagination, it complements that strategy because it is very effective in a deck that wants to empty its hand. A deck full of 1 or 2 cost characters is going to empty its hand really quickly, right? If you're playing it and you've only got those cards in hand, you're probably emptying your hand by turn 3 or 4, right? So Beast's Mirror works really well in a deck like that. I've found that Beast's Mirror is consistent enough that allows you to stay in the game. Whereas if you didn't draw either, you're kind of out of luck, right? And there's times, honestly, where when I've been playing, I've actually kept a hand with Beast's Mirror and just a bunch of low-cost characters, knowing that I would be able to, within a couple of turns, start activating Beast's Mirror. So, something to consider about your choice of colors. I would not begrudge you going into Amethyst. I think it's a very powerful combination, but this is why I went into Steel, is for the consistency of being able to have 8 cards in my deck that would really benefit from my combo versus just the 4 of Stitch Rockstar. So that's why we went with Steel and Beast's Mirror. So now we have our colors. Let's talk about the different elements in the deck. So in our last deck tech video, we talked about the elements that you would want to address, or the things that you would want in your mid-range deck to really complement that playstyle. So in a combination deck, it's a little bit more straightforward in terms of the elements that you want to hit, but there's still a few things to look at. So first one, very straightforward, is your key pieces, right? If you've got 2 or 3 key pieces to your deck, to that combination, obviously you're going to want to include 4 of those. In our case, though, it's a little bit different because the other part of the equation with Stitch Rockstar is just 1 or 2 cost characters in general, right? So then we have to decide, well, which 1 or 2 cost characters, and then we have to decide how many. And what I've found is, through playtesting, again, anything that stops my combination from going off, from just drawing 1, 2 cost characters consistently again and again and again, has to be really good for it to fit into the deck. I think I ended up with about 40 out of my 60 cards being 1 or 2 cost characters, just so that I knew that I could consistently hit those cards again and again and again. Right? We're going to come back to how I came to that number, but ultimately that was the conclusion that I came with, as I knew when I started to build this variant of the deck that I was looking for as many of those 1 or 2 cost characters as possible. So what I did is I worked backwards from that. I said, okay, let me figure out the cards I need to include in my deck, and then whatever space is left, I'll put 1 or 2 cost characters in there. So that's what we're going to get back to. So with that in mind, there's 2 other elements that I want to look at. The first is, can we speed up the process? So combo decks, to some degree, are playing a bit of solitaire, right? Let me just do my thing as quickly as possible, try not to be interrupted by my opponent, and get my combo to go off as quickly as possible, right? So part of being as quickly as possible is drawing those cards, but another is potentially playing them sooner than you might have otherwise, right? So we have what's called ramp cards. I talked about that in previous videos, but ramp cards, if you hear the term ramp, is effectively ramping up your ink production. So rather than just the 1 ink per turn that you're allowed to play, cards that will contribute to that, will speed it up, right? Cards like One Jump Ahead, cards like Mickey Mouse Detective. Those cards will ramp up your ink. Now we know that we're in amber and steel, so we've got very limited options in terms of ramp cards. Namely, right now, we just have the card Lantern. Now, you may look at Lantern and think, this is perfect for the deck. It speeds up the combination. Great, right? We can play, our ideal play is turn 1, Stitch New Dog. Turn 2, Lantern. Turn 3, we can actually shift Stitch Rockstar onto Stitch New Dog, right? So we've got a turn 3 Stitch Rockstar on the battlefield. That is incredibly powerful. So you might think, I need to have 4 Lantern in my deck because ultimately I want that ideal draw as much as possible. And that's a good instinct. And for the most part, start with that. So when you're building a deck, what you probably want to do, the simplest way to start, is pick your 15 best cards for the deck and just have 4 of those and just start with that. And then as you play the deck, you'll get a feel for, maybe I don't want to draw this as much, right? We're actually going to come back to that a little bit later when I talk about playtesting, but it's worth addressing now because I can tell you that I actually narrowed down to 2 Lantern. Because ideally, I really wanted to draw 1 early for that ideal play I talked about. But later on, as I'm trying to go off with Stitch, if I draw a Lantern when I'm trying to go off with Stitch, that's a problem, right? That slows me down. That's not a character, and it's taking away from my ink to potentially play more characters, right? It will add to my ink in future turns, and that's fine. But if I need to go off now, drawing a Lantern is a death knell for the deck, right? So ultimately, I slimmed it down to 2. And I may adjust that number over time, but I realized that I didn't want to draw a bunch of them. So I slimmed it down a little bit. So as we get more cards revealed, I might look at if there's other cards that ramp my mana in Amber or Steel, or if I maybe go back to Amber Amethyst, right? I might incorporate those instead of Lantern as well as Lantern. We'll see. But effectively, that's the first thing when you're building a combination deck that you want to look at, other than your key elements, is how do I speed up this process? Okay. So the last element that we want to look at is how do we interact with our opponent? Again, I mentioned that the combo deck is sometimes a bit of solitaire, but what I've found in Lorcana, which I think is great, is that you can't really go off quick enough to completely ignore your opponent. They can, almost under any circumstances, with any combination of cards, race you to 20 if you just completely ignore them. As well, I've identified a few threats to Stitch Rockstar, and as I mentioned, we really need to keep him on the battlefield, so we want to potentially address those proactively, right? So, what ways can we interact with our opponent without detracting too much from our combination and the ability to go off? So the most straightforward is removal action cards. What is removal? Well, removal typically refers to some way to banish your opponent's characters with an action card. So we've got options of Fire the Cannons, we've got options of Smash in Steel, obviously in other colors if you partnered it with, there are other removal cards, some very direct. So like Let It Go in Sapphire, it is direct removal, unconditional as they say. You can remove any character, whereas Smash and Fire the Cannons are specific to damage. But given that we're in Steel, those are the best options we've got. Another way we might interact with our opponent is by further shielding Stitch. I've talked about how important he is, right? Bodyguard is a great ability, a great way to protect Stitch Rockstar. It also allows you to be a little bit more greedy with exerting Stitch to challenge or to quest for lore, right? You don't want to be too willy-nilly with it, but you do want to give yourself the freedom to potentially use some of his other great abilities as a character if you've got the bodyguards to protect him. So right now with Bodyguard in Amber Steel, we've got access to a few different options. We've got Hercules, we've got Goofy, we've got Mickey Musketeer, right? I chose Hercules in this situation because for the sake of Beast's Mirror, I wanted to keep costs as low as possible. I didn't want Mickey stuck in my hand. But I can tell you, Mickey's 7 willpower is nothing to sneeze at. So once again, I wouldn't blame you for including Mickey Musketeer in your deck. The reason why I didn't is because I wanted to keep my costs very low to be able to use Beast Mirror as quickly as possible. Now, in addition to those elements, which I think you always want to reflect on when building a combination deck, there is one thing you can optionally look at, which is what I would refer to as niche cards. Cards that fill a very specific effect that, depending on the metagame, we might want to include. Now, what is the metagame? The metagame is typically the decks that you see most often. So if you go to your local game store, or we have the capacity to play online once the set's released, if Ravensburger creates an official platform, right? You're going to be playing a lot of opponents. And if you see decks very consistently, so right now the deck that's kind of dominating the metagame is Amethyst Emerald, but whatever it is when you're watching this video, or whatever it is when you go to your local game store, that's referred to as the metagame, the decks that we see most often, right? So depending on what the metagame is right now, you might want to include a couple of cards that deal with those specific decks. So what are some examples of niche cards like these, very metagame specific cards? Cards like Beast Hardheaded. Okay, so that banishes, items. So if item decks, if all of a sudden that aerial item deck really gets off the ground, then you might want to include, some Beast Hardheaded to impact those. I was originally including Simba Returned King to deal with evasive characters, but quite frankly, Genie on the Job made that irrelevant. He bounces Simba really easily, and it really is unfortunate to try and replay a 7-cost character without crying. So but that's a niche type character, right? Something that deals with evasive, deals with big characters, right? If all of a sudden big ramp decks with, Maui are everywhere and dominating the metagame, you might want to include Simba Return King all of a sudden, right? So you could potentially look at some niche cards to fill the last couple of slots if you feel like it was important for the metagame. So for example, if there was a 4 damage spell, you best believe that I would be including that in this deck to deal with Genie, to deal with Iago, to deal with cards like that. All right, so let's assemble the deck. Let's first talk about the cards that we were kind of must includes. So first of all, obviously you've got 4 of Stitch Rockstar, and we've got 4 of Beast Mirror. Those are our draw engines that make this deck go, that make it work at all. Then we've got our kind of interaction elements, so the things that we've got to interact with our opponent. So at this point in my playtesting, I've decided to include 4 of Smash, 4 of Fire the Cannons, and 4 of Hercules. Again, all of those cards impede my ability to go off with Stitch Rockstar, so I have to be very cautious, and I'm going to keep playtesting to determine if those are appropriate. And quite frankly, if they reveal more 1 or 2 cost characters in Amber and Steel, those will probably contribute in bumping things off of this list, right? But for now, I'm including 4 of each of those as interactive elements, okay? Then we've got our ramp elements. I mentioned earlier that I've trimmed down to 2 lantern. I may change that with more playtesting, but right now I feel that's the appropriate amount to try and increase my odds of drawing 1 early while not drawing a whole bunch later on in the game. Which leaves us with a bunch of slots for 1 and 2 cost characters. Quite frankly, more than we've got available right now. So I included legitimately every 1 and 2 cost character available right now in Amber and Steel, but I'm absolutely going to look at changing that as we develop the deck, as more cards are revealed. So we've got 4 of Captain Hook, Forceful Duelist. He is incredibly useful for dealing with opposing Cheshire Cats. Elsa that we mentioned earlier, if she's exerted, he's a great one to send in to deal with her, right? But he is a reactive character. So he's one that ideally you don't want to be your first turn play, because he would not be able to quest. He would lose to an opposing 2/2 character if that was on the battlefield. Namely, it's not ideal, but it also deals very well, as does everything, with Maleficent biding her time. We've got Stitch New Dog, very obvious. I should have mentioned that in the auto includes earlier. That is obviously an auto include for shifting Rockstar. We've got Hey Hey Boat Snack. Is very good at supporting our 2 strength characters to deal with those 3 willpower opposing characters, right? Or potentially boosting Captain Hook Forceful Duelist to deal with Iago, right? We've got Mini Beloved Princess, which, although she costs 2, is potentially my favorite 2-cost character in this deck. Because imagine you've got characters like Eric that challenge very well, but when you're playing and exerting your characters right away, right, with Stitch Rockstar, I'm drawing my 1 or 2-cost characters, I'm exerting them to draw a card, Minnie survives the best out of all these characters, right? She is the most resilient and or deals the most damage when she is being challenged of all the 2-cost characters I've got. So she might actually be my favorite. Next, we've got Lefou. So Lefou is great in that he produces 2 lore, but challenging that he only has 1 strength. So going back to Minnie Mouse, he is not great to come out and exert immediately, but because you're drawing cards and potentially putting out more and more and more, you still want to exert him almost all of the time. There is the occasional time where you might not want to exert him. So for example, if he's the last character you can play in the turn, and you've already got a couple cards in hand, and you don't desperately need that card draw, you might want to look at leaving him unexerted, just so you can guarantee get that 2 lore off of him. It's very situational, and this is going to come down to practice. When is the right time? But he's the only one that I might consider not exerting for a card draw. Okay. Then we've got Goons. All right, very straightforward. Vanilla 1 ink 2/2, but very efficient. Any 1 cost pretty much I'm thrilled with. We've got Prince Eric, right? So Prince Eric, again, not great to be exerted for card draw, but another one that allows us to draw cards and is potentially useful in the early game for challenging. We've got Timon, which I have a lot to say about Timon. I'll be very quick about in this video. He is not a first turn play. Please stop keeping him in your opening hands. On the first turn, he's not healing anybody, and he's probably losing to almost every other character other than Maleficent biding her time in a challenge. So mulligan him out of your opening hands and hope to draw him later in the game where his heal ability might be useful and or he's just a cheap card draw character. All right. And lastly, in our 1-drop slot, we've got the best 1-drop of all, which is Simba Future King. As soon as this card was revealed, I actually originally recorded this deck tech video before that card was revealed, and the audio was garbage, so I had to record it, which is great because this card is perfect for this deck. A 1-drop character that allows you to filter through your deck to get towards Stitch Rockstar faster. And later, when you play Stitch Rockstar, allows you to discard some of those cards that aren't helping your combo, like a Smash, like a Lantern, later on in the game, right? And then you get to exert to draw another card from. That is just perfect. Just chef's kiss. Simba should be in the auto include. Let me go back in time and throw him into the auto include because he is that good in this deck. Now, for any of you that are doing the math, that leaves us with 2 slots left. What can we use in those slots? So we talked about niche cards. Beast Hard-Headed, right? Simba Returned King. Simba is not good for me right now. He gets bounced by Genie too easily. Beast, there isn't really any big item decks that I'm dealing with right now. So there isn't really any niche cards that I want to include. So I've decided to include 2 of Stitch Carefree Surfer. Now you might say, Heath, this is a Stitch deck about drawing cards. Stitch Carefree Surfer wants a lot of characters, which you're going to have when you got low-cost characters. This is the perfect card for this deck. Why is this not in the auto-include? Why is this not 4 of? You got 2 of them? What are you thinking of? You've gone crazy. A little bit, yes, but besides the point. What I've found in playing around with this deck is that Stitch Carefree Surfer really feels like a win more card. What do I mean by win more? What that typically refers to is a card that's great, but is typically only coming into play or having an effect when you're already ahead. There are times where I've been down to my last 2 or 3 characters and I'm mostly stabilized, but my opponent's ahead and I'm got 7 ink and I draw a Carefree Surfer. I'm like, this is wonderful. I get to put a big body in play. I get to draw a couple more cards. Maybe draw back into my combo elements, because chances are if I'm in this situation, somebody's already banished my Stitch Rockstar, right? Great. But what I found happens more often is that I'm trying to go off, and I've even got 7 or 8 ink, but I draw a Carefree Surfer, and I'm like, would I rather have one 4/8 character that draws me 2 cards, or would I rather have drawn a 1 or 2 cost character that I could chain into another 1 or 2 cost character that I could chain into another, into another. Shout out to Citizens of Lorcana, who loves his Team Flounder memes there, with how everything is worse than just a bunch of flounders. The problem with that argument, and I'm sure he knows it, is that Flounder is multiple cards. So you need to draw cards for that ink and strength and willpower and lore comparison to really work. But this is a perfect situation for that. If I knew that my deck was 4 flounders on top of each other, and my alternative was drawing Stitch Carefree Surfer or the first flounder, well, of course I want to draw that first flounder. Pay an ink, draw another flounder, another flounder, another flounder, another flounder. Not that I'm playing Sapphire, but you get the illustration, right? So even when Carefree Surfer would be good, if I've got Rockstar out on the battlefield and I've got the ink for Carefree Surfer, I'd much rather have drawn one of my low-cost characters and chain into a bunch of others. So it's a situation where it's not really perfect when the deck's actually working. And it's not really a card that's necessary if I've already gone off or I'm going off. Right? So there is situations where Carefree Surfer works, which is why I want it in the deck. But surprisingly not that many. Most of the time, before even turn 5 or 6, I'm putting down Carefree Surfer as ink. So that should tell you a little bit about that card's inclusion in the deck. All right, so I'm going to include 2 of them, but honestly, just because I've got the 2 slots. I can tell you that there is a few 1 or 2 cost characters I'd probably remove if we get a bunch more revealed. Probably Timon and Lefou at the top of that list. If we could get Aurora Regal Princess in Amber or Steel, so a 2 cost 2/2 with 2 lore, versus Lefou's I'm cheaper if you've got a Gaston in my deck, unless there's a 1 or 2 cost Gaston, and then absolutely I'll include it. I have a feeling Gaston's going to be a higher cost. So I'll probably get rid of Lefou, I'll probably get rid of Timon, but I think Carefree Surfer might be the first cut when we get another 1 or 2 cost revealed. I honestly do, which makes me sad, because I was so excited when I saw it. And it might still be a good card. Playtesting might reveal otherwise. Which brings me to my last point, and I'm finally wrapping this up. I'm cutting out some stuff, but probably I'm at the 35-minute mark or something like this. So any of you that have stuck with me, thank you. But my last point is around playtesting. And I know some of you might say, Heath, that's what I come to you for. You're supposed to do the playtesting for me so I can just figure out what decks work well and just play them. And that's fine. But again, this series is not for you for the most part. I'm glad you're here. Don't get me wrong. Please continue watching. Please subscribe. But ultimately, I want this series of videos to be for those of you that want to build your own decks and want those tools, right? And I can absolutely guarantee you that the best way to approach that is to playtest. Again, if you want to keep things really simple at the start, get the best 15 cards you can think of for your deck, put 4 of them of each in your deck, and just play with it a bunch. And then you'll come to the realization, hopefully like I did with Lantern, with Carefree Surfer, that I'm drawing this card and I'm not loving it, all right? Or I've got this card in my opening hand and I want to mulligan it. That should probably tell you something, right? So this is where playtesting can really help you and make those key decisions. Like I've got the 10 spots for my 12 interactive cards. which two do I cut? Well, through playtesting a lot, I came to that conclusion, and I also am open to the fact that I might change that conclusion based on more playtesting, right? So I can't stress this enough. If you want to build your own decks, absolutely do it, but then playtest them a bunch and just know that it's not going to work perfectly. No one builds the perfect deck the first time. It comes through time, through practice, and through making adjustments, all right? Thank you so much for the probably one of you that stuck around this long. I hope that you got out of it what my intention was, which was I hope you can take this and not necessarily apply it to a Stitch Rockstar deck, but to any combo deck that you want to build. If you want to build a mid-range deck, check out our deck tech series. We've got the Amethyst Steel mid-range in there, and use that for building your own mid-range deck. I'll be coming out with others when there's pure control decks, when there's aggro decks that I want to play, whatever the case may be. I'll speak to other archetypes and how you can build those in future series. But thank you again so much. If you like this, throw me a like. If you didn't, I understand. I appreciate any and all feedback in the comments. Honestly, the likes and the subscribes are awesome. Great dopamine hits, right? Feels good. But at the end of the day, the comments are what really feels good, because it's feedback, it's ideas, all sorts of great content in there. So thank you so much for those of you that do leave your comments. A few quick shout outs to some of our most frequent commenters. We got Nick, who's been a constant joy to see in our comments. We've got Sile, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. We've got David Welsh, who's been in the comments a lot. Steggy, who's been in the comments. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Keep it up. And yeah, look forward to the feedback. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone for watching. It's truly an honor to see you enjoying our videos. Thank you to Lorcana.com for having us as one of their featured creators, and thank you to the amazing community coming together around this incredible game. Please like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what you'd like to see on our next video. Until next time, if you'd like to continue with us on this journey, please be our guest.